Welcome to the debut episode of Paranormal PTSD, where we dive into the extraordinary, the unexplained, and the often stigmatized world of paranormal experiences. I'm your host, Laura Giles, and I'm thrilled to have you join me on this journey into the unknown. In the first episode, I'm going to tell you a little bit about me, how this podcast got started, and explain what is paranormal PTSD and complex PTSD. So you will know if you need to subscribe because this content is just what you're looking for. My big picture goal is to destigmatize paranormal experiences in a post-disclosure world. Whether you've seen a UFO, encountered a ghost, or experienced something you can't quite explain, you're not alone. Here, we'll create a safe place for experiencers to share their stories without fear of judgment or ridicule. This can empower people to stand in their power, get rid of the shame, and add to the wealth of knowledge so that we can all be more aware of what's going on in the world around us and make up our own minds about what is true. We'll also bring in researchers and experts who are at the forefront of this field to share compelling evidence so we can draw the line between what's real and what's illusion, misinformation, and disinformation. But this podcast is not just about sharing stories and evidence. We understand that having a paranormal experience can be traumatic. The fear, confusion, and isolation can be overwhelming. And that's why we'll also focus on healing paranormal PTSD. We'll explore methods and strategies to help those who've been affected by these events to reclaim their lives and find peace. Trauma is a life-altering condition that impacts the mind, body, emotions, and spirit, and relationships. It can keep us from thriving, but this can heal. And it's my wish that this podcast will give you the hope that kicks off that healing journey. Now, you may be wondering who I am. I'm a licensed clinical social worker who has worked in a maximum security prison, a psychiatric hospital, community services board, a court system, and in private practice. And I've worked in trauma over 20 years and have seen people with paranormal PTSD in all of these settings. So it's not new and it's not rare. I get lots of clients who have been in counseling for many years, but their trauma symptoms are still as bad as they were way back when the triggering event originally happened. Many of them don't even know they have PTSD. And this is because counseling isn't trauma therapy. If you aren't working with a trauma therapist who is using trauma techniques, you won't heal. It's not enough to show up and talk to someone. You have to actually be addressing the tough issues, using treatment modalities that are effective. And I will share what those are as we go along because I want you to get well and to educate yourself enough to advocate for yourself. So I hope to have people on here who can give you a firsthand account of their healing. And if you have a story of paranormal PTSD and you want to share and are willing to let go of that fear, contact me. Maybe you can be a guest. In addition to being a trauma therapist, I have taken people on spiritual tours around the world for over 20 years. During those adventures, we've all had a lot of mysterious experiences that qualify as supernatural. I've had lots of kooky, unexplained experiences. I grew up in a family where a spiritual phenomenon was just a fact of life. I didn't find it particularly scary because it was normalized, and I could talk about it with my family members, so I felt supported, heard, and validated. And I'll tell you some of those stories along the way, I'm sure, and you may be horrified. If you didn't grow up with that, having paranormal experiences can be really terrifying and even induce PTSD. So having a supportive community is very important. And this is why I have created a private space where people can ask questions, share their experiences, and support each other. The link is in the show notes, and I encourage you to check it out, especially since it's free until the end of June as my launch gift to everyone. Now, throughout my career, I've always had clients with paranormal experiences and paranormal PTSD. Those who reached out to tell someone in the mental health community were usually treated like they were crazy. I've seen this over and over. When I worked in a psych hospital, one of my clients was from a culture that regularly talked with spirit, and that caused her to be involuntarily committed and medicated. And we're all supposed to be educated in cultural competence. I couldn't believe it. I also have an experience that I don't remember. I'm curious about it, but there has never been a nagging need to know. Then recently I decided to check it out. I had a referral from a highly respected agency and the helper seemed very qualified, so I went into it feeling pretty comfortable. Then I was treated like I wasn't believed. I felt like I was being treated like I was either crazy or had some childhood abuse that I was covering up, and it made me angry. I don't want anyone to be treated like that, so I'm here to make sure that this prejudice and invalidating behavior ends. Hospice workers all report spirit sightings. People have near death experiences. We've had disclosure. Governments all over the world have finally admitted that UAPs are real. And this means that there are entities with advanced technology flying around. These beings beam people up and they return them. They mutilate cattle, they can walk through walls, read minds, and implant thoughts into our minds. The stories of Bigfoot, skinwalkers, and wendigos have been around since forever. So, do they have those abilities too? Suddenly, we go from being the top predator to being outclassed with technology and knowledge, and we have to learn how to accommodate this information into our lives so we can live in truth. We have to accept this and stop treating people who encounter these things like they're crazy. On Paranormal PTSD Recovery, we're diving into these stories. We're validating experiences and offering hope. Whether you're a believer, a skeptic, or someone who's had an experience and doesn't know what to think, this podcast is for you. I'll never tell you what to think. I'll only ask that you keep an open mind and consider the evidence. So let's talk about what is paranormal PTSD. The term is a medical term that is defined by the American Psychiatric Association. If you go to a mental health professional and request help, the first thing that happens is that they have to evaluate you and decide if you have a problem, what the problem is, and then choose the course of action called a treatment plan to address that issue. The American Psychiatric Association, or AMA, puts all these problems into a book called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM. If you have a condition that's not in there, you can't be treated because they don't consider it a real thing. And paranormal PTSD isn't in there. Neither is complex PTSD, but they are real things that therapists encounter every day. The AMA is reactionary. They can only look at what people in the field report to them, and nobody is talking about paranormal PTSD, so it's not in there. But neither is rape trauma syndrome, religious trauma syndrome, medical PTSD, or complex PTSD, but the people in the field are addressing it. All these things mean is that the trauma comes from rape, belonging to a religious faith, a medical encounter, or a paranormal encounter. It's all PTSD. The triggering events have some influence on the recovery, but the meat of the matter is the trauma response. So let's look at the medical criteria for officially having PTSD. The first criterion is that, and this is word for word, you have exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence in one or more of the following ways: directly experiencing the traumatic event, witnessing in person the event as it occurred to others, learning that the traumatic event occurred to a close family member or close friend. In cases of actual or threatened death of a family member or friend, the event must have been violent or accidental. Experiencing repeated or extreme exposure to adverse details of the traumatic event, such as first responders collecting human remains, police officers repeatedly exposed to details of child abuse. And note, criterion A4, which is that one, does not apply to exposure through electronic media, television, movies, or pictures unless the exposure is work-related. And that's the end of the definition. Now, I don't know about you, but all that sounds kind of crazy. How do you decide that watching all the sex and violence that we're exposed to every day, day after day, isn't traumatizing, but seeing it during the course of work is? That seems odd to me. And the biggest WTF part of this is that the triggering event has to involve threatened death, serious violence, or sexual assault. So if I bully you every day, that's not traumatizing. If I criticize you, call you names, nitpick everything you do, that's not traumatizing. If a boogeyman stands outside your window watching you and nobody believes you, that's not traumatizing, according to the AMA. Let me tell you now that I have many clients who didn't fear their lives. weren't sexually assaulted and didn't have any serious violence in their lives because trauma is not about what happened to you. It's about your thoughts about what happened to you, your support to recover, and whether or not you feel that you have any power. Two people can experience the same thing, but one is traumatized by it and the other isn't. And this is clear evidence that it's not about what happens. Sebastian Junger wrote an excellent book called Tribe on Homecoming and Belonging. And in it, he talks about how some people in World War II found belonging by embracing each other through the struggle. This wasn't something that was happening to one of them in a vacuum, it was happening to all of them. And when they bonded together, they could view it as one of the most amazing times of their lives. And I felt the same way on a recent pilgrimage in Cornwall. Well, most of my sacred travel experiences are like that because we go through these incredible journeys, and there is no one in the world except the people who are there who can understand what it meant to your heart and soul. And sometimes those are positive, uplifting things, and sometimes they're hard. And it's like you think it might break you, but either way, you're not alone. And that bonding is powerful for the psyche. And all that is to say bollocks to the first and most important criterion of the DSM, because according to them, if you didn't have an event where you feared your life, were seriously injured, or sexually assaulted, you can't have PTSD, and that's just not true. In practice, PTSD is when you endure a stressor and your nervous system gets pushed beyond its ability to cope. You go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and it sticks there. The result of that are a group of symptoms. So let's look at the next one. So criteria B is that you re-experience the event through things like flashbacks, nightmares, or intrusive thoughts. If something reminds you of the event, it causes distress. And that's another way that this could show up. So let's say that a person with red curly hair was the aggressor, and now you see anyone with red hair and you get nervous. That's an example. Criterion C is about avoiding the traumatic event. So maybe you don't talk about it. If it happened on a baseball field, you avoid baseball fields. So that could be one that fits that one. Criterion D is that your mood and thinking is more negatively skewed after the event. So you might lose your memory of the event. You might think that you're bad because this happened. It could be that you're more negative or lose interest in things that you used to like. You could isolate and not want to be around people. It may be hard for you to be perky or positive, that kind of thing. Criterion E is about arousal and reactivity, which typically means that you're highly sensitive and reactive. Unfortunately, a lot of people think this has something to do with being more spiritual or special, but it's a nervous system thing. If I'm on high alert to danger so I can stay safe, I'm going to notice everything sooner and be more sensitive. So I notice nuances in mood. This could be exhausting because I'm probably irritable and have angry outbursts. Maybe I'm hypervigilant and have big responses when I'm startled. I can't concentrate or sleep. Maybe I engage in reckless or self destructive behavior because I don't know how else to express myself. All of these have to be happening to officially qualify for a PTSD diagnosis, and these symptoms have to endure longer than a month. They can't be caused by things like a medical condition or addiction, and they have to make life harder for me. This is significant impairment that needs appropriate treatment. And if the trauma happened when you were little, or if you grew up in a family of traumatized people and this is just the normal environment, you may not realize that you have trauma and don't seek treatment. There's another group of folks who have trauma who often don't seek treatment, and these are the ones who are the perfectionists and overachievers. They aren't acting out usually. You can't see their stress, so they look fine. It's like a lot of people still think of PTSD like it's a soldier's disease. It happened from combat, so why would they have it? Because they work in a high stress environment with an abusive boss. Not everyone presents with big emotions. Instead of exploding, they implode. Trauma is not about what you see. It's about the nervous system not bouncing back after experiencing extreme stress. One telltale way is to poke it and see what the body does. When people tell me, oh, yeah, that thing had happened a long time ago, I'm past that, but they haven't actually done anything to heal it, I don't believe them. And when they're poked, it comes back up. We all have these triggers that we don't know about. We call that shadow work. And if you aren't looking at that stuff and living consciously, sooner or later, it trips you up. sometimes in really big ways. I don't want to be blindsided by things, so I prefer to work on that kind of stuff. If you see Steve Aspen's video, and some future guests have this perspective too, you will see that he believes that alien abductees are taken over and over again across their lifespan. PTSD is typically around one or a few exposures to something like a car accident, being badly beaten once, or being mugged. Complex PTSD happens when there are many chronic, inescapable traumas. So it's the little things that happen over and over again. Some people are traumatized by racism, by repeated exposure to microaggression. If you work with a toxic boss, his repeated invalidation can cause you to walk on eggshells and experience complex PTSD. Growing up with an alcoholic or mentally ill or even physically ill parent could cause complex PTSD if you never know what to expect from day to day, or ignored, neglected, and didn't feel seen or heard. With complex PTSD, there's still flashbacks and nightmares, but instead of having an exaggerated startle reflex, there might be no startle at all. These people tend to say nothing gets to them. A bomb could go off beside them and they don't flinch. That's not a good thing. Our nervous system isn't working if that's happening. With complex PTSD, the person is more likely to feel that they're not real or the world isn't real. It's like living in the third person or living in a dream, and it's disturbing. Also, with complex PTSD, trusting feels dangerous. They may search for a rescuer but are repeatedly disappointed. They lose faith, and then the cycle repeats all over again. If you're preoccupied with the paranormal or supernatural event that traumatized you, that's another sign of paranormal PTSD. The perceptions of the bad guy, whatever that is, are distorted, and all the focus is put on that thing, which is why I think some people have obsessions with aliens, Bigfoot, ghosts, and those type of things. It's a way to try to relieve it and have it come out differently. It's a search for control. People with complex PTSD are more likely to isolate and feel a sense of guilt and shame around what happened. This is why having a place to go where you feel understood is super important. I've been to a lot of communities on the paranormal and supernatural, and they seem to have a few things in common. Most have a slant. They're either in the camp that these experiences are good or they're bad. And if you've already made up your mind about what's going on, then you don't have the freedom to explore. When I worked in domestic violence, the thing that we never did was to tell a victim to leave. Power and control are important, and the victim had to have the power and control over their lives because that's the thing that the perpetrator was taking away. That's what kept the PTSD intact. So in my group, we never tell each other what to think or what's going on with their situation. I was recently in a group where I posted one thing. It was scant on details, and some well meaning person rushed in to rescue me and started telling me the meaning of my experience. And I deleted my post and left. So I'm not a child who needs to be told what to think. I wasn't asking for that and don't want to be in that environment, even if it's well intentioned. I want to be around healthy adults with healthy boundaries, and that is what you'll find in my group. The other thing I find common in groups is that it's about a cult of personality. That even though I'm the founder of this podcast in the private community, the last thing I ever want in the world is followers or groupies. I want to learn from you. And if I'm so far above you, that's not going to happen. We're all teachers for each other. And if we're open minded enough to receive that, and in my podcast and private group, you will hear all kinds of perspectives, even those that I may or may not agree with because I could be wrong, then you're going to grow. And I don't want to not entertain something because I'm not there yet. So, healing requires that you start to trust yourself and the world around you. You have to have opinions. Doesn't matter if they evolve. Nobody knows what's truly going on yet. And if we don't have the conversation, we never will. And if we're stuck in fear because of PTSD, we won't either. And that's my goal, to heal so that as we move into the post-disclosure world, we do it with love, not fear. Living in a world where things can see you, but you can't see them, where they appear at will, where they have abilities that we don't have, is scary. It's frightening to go from the top predator to, well, I'm not actually sure where we stand. And we can't create a healthy place for ourselves in that world if we're coming from a place of trauma. So that's what the Paranormal PTSD Recovery Podcast is about. Sit back, relax, and open your mind as we embark on this incredible journey together. I'm dropping 4 episodes today so you can binge listen and get a flavor of the vibe. Thank you for tuning into our first episode. Remember to subscribe, leave a review, and share your thoughts. If you have a story you'd like to share or a topic you'd like us to cover, reach out. We're here to listen and support. Until next time, stay curious, stay open, and remember, you're not alone. Thanks, guys. Ciao.